It's time for Football at 4 with Adam Caplan.
I have real confidence that our football operations can once again create a dominant football team.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on Football at 4 on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, the latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast dropped this morning. Adam Caplan, Jeff Mosher. Also, you should be following the Inside the Birds podcast all week because, as Adam can testify to, that Jason Avant, Quentin Michael podcast from Wednesday might have been one of the greatest episodes of all time. Adam, how you doing on this Thursday?
Good to talk to you, Josh. Yeah, it was incredible. The Terrell Owens story, first of all, you have to hear Quentin Michael talk about the Terrell Owens story because I kind of lived that one in that a lot of us who covered the team then found out about it. And Jeff Mosher and I talked about it. It was actually Jeff's first year covering the Eagles was in 05. And that 05 season, Josh, was one of the most bizarre that I could remember in covering this team and covering any team, quite frankly. We talk about sort of the relationships players have with each other and infighting and so forth. But the McNabb-Owens saga, and then Hugh Douglas and Owens, you have to hear it. And then also Jason Avant's story with Steve Smith. I'm not going to give it away. It's ridiculously funny because I didn't know it was coming. I just knew that I knew he was going to talk about it. But wait till you hear that one. Those guys are incredible, and we've learned so much from them, and we appreciate having them as partners here.
Yeah, it drops every Wednesday, part of the Inside the Birds podcasting network. Speaking of relationships, Adam, to me, the biggest news of the week, you guys talked about this morning on the Inside the Birds pod, Nick Sirianni connected with the veterans. The veterans are at the NovaCare. Let's get into this because to me, this is a huge deal. I mean, talk about getting off the ground started. Nick Sirianni basically, according to your report, reached out and said, hey, guys, how can we make this work?
Yeah, I got to give the guy credit. This is exact opposite of what I thought would have happened because remember, we can only go by what the players said. They put a statement out back in April that they were not going to report to OTAs at all. They would only come to the mandatory camp in mid-June. And Sirianni reached out to the veterans and said, hey, listen, what do you think of this? They went back and forth. It was a negotiation, a discussion of what would work for both sides. And Sirianni got what he wanted. He's going to have the non-mandatory OTAs with the veterans. The ones that are going to show up are going to show up. And there's some guys who are not showing up. Right now, Zach Ertz has not showed up. But there will be no mandatory camp, which is only 3 days. So the way I look at it is you're trading in 3 days for 3 weeks. I think you take the 3 weeks if you're Nick Sirianni, and I give him credit. This is a pretty solid showing of leadership. And also, yes, he wanted them to practice. He wants to see his new players, and this is a big move for him. I would agree with your assessment. This is a pretty good start that he's getting off to here.
So let's help people understand the details. So this week is phase 2. What exactly does that include, and why is that important this week?
Yeah, so there are no 7-on-7, no 11-on-11, which we would see if we were allowed to go. We're not as a media, but what typically what we would see would be 7-on-7 probably by the second week of OTAs. You're going to see 7-on-7 and 11-on-11. Well, we're not getting any of that. They're not. This is part of the negotiation that the players wanted. They don't want team drills. They'll do individual drills. They're going to in classroom teaching. They're going to go over schemes. They're going to get their strength and conditioning on. The big thing that Sirianni and his coaches are going to be stressing, and obviously Sirianni is the head coach, is fundamentals. This is something he talks about to his players and his coaches. They coach it, and they're going to coach it hard. This is a big deal for them. And this is what happens when you take over a team. I'm not saying Sirianni noticed this specifically, but the Eagles were an error-prone team. Part of being 4-11-1, Josh, is not just the roster wasn't good enough. That's part of it. But they had a lot of mental errors. Route running for the receivers was not great. Defensively, they had a lot of breakdowns, particularly in the secondary. Now, we could argue that some of the corners were not very good. That's true. But this is a team that was not really good with fundamentals. And maybe the Phillies could learn a little bit about the fundamentals of football.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when Sirianni kept saying fundamentals and technique the other day, Adam, all I kept thinking about was, you know who that reminds me of? It reminds me of some of the best coaches in the league. Belichick, Tomlin, Andy Reid. I mean, Brian Flores down in Miami. These guys, they care so much about the details of the game. And honestly, it's refreshing to hear Sirianni say that.
Yeah, it sounded like Doug Peterson didn't talk about it before, but I don't remember him, and I have to go back to 2016, 5 years ago, and see exactly what he said when he first got the job. But this guy's not backed off. And I could tell you a couple other things just to add behind the scenes is that he's very big on connecting with his players, and he made it kind of a requirement that his assistants do the same thing. It's not that they're friends off the field. It's just that they get to know each other and know what the expectations are. And you want to do this when you start. You don't want to start doing this 4 years later. And this part of, I think, the breakdown with Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson is Peterson left it to his top two lieutenants in terms of coaching the quarterback, was Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. And once those guys left, Peterson didn't know him very well. And I think that was part of why Wentz and Peterson in the end failed. It's because they just didn't have an understanding of each other. And this is a good thing that Sirianni requires his coaches, as I understand it, to connect with his players. It's a good thing.
Adam, you and Moshe have mentioned multiple times on the Inside the Birds podcast about the issue of coaching the coaches. And it sounds like to me that Sirianni's falling into that mold a little better than Peterson was, that he is very specific with his coaches.
I got to give you credit, Josh, because we haven't talked about that probably since last season. So you clearly listen to our show. We appreciate that. You're right. It's something I actually first heard Ron Jaworski say years ago, and I didn't quite understand what he meant, and Jaws would explain it, is that you can't just leave your coaches to coach without evaluating them as they go. And Sirianni actually talked about that when he was asked last week about competition. I know it's a buzzword with coaches. They all use that, Josh. But one of the things is he's going to manage his coaches. You can't just roll the coaches out there and expect them to do well on their own. You don't have to micromanage them, but you have to manage them. You don't want to wait till something becomes bad where maybe this coach is not teaching it the way you want it done. Andy Reid would hand off to Marty Mornhinweg many years ago when they were both with the Eagles. When things were not going well, he would hand off to Marty to have Marty run the offense. And Joe Benner actually told us this. This was crazy. I'd never even heard this before. He told us this on Inside the Birds TV last summer. He just dropped that on us. And we never heard that before, that Andy we only thought it happened a couple times. He said it happened all the time. When Andy was not comfortable with something, he'd say, Marty, take over. This needs to get fixed or changed or adjusted. So that's just being a good head coach. I understand Sirianni is not coaching the game yet. We understand that. But just from doing the things that you want to hear and saying it the right way and knowing behind the scenes what I've heard, he's off to a good start.
Adam Caplan, NFL insider, co-host of the Inside the Birds podcast. Newest episode dropped this morning at Caplan NFL on Twitter, here on Football at 4 on 97.3 ESPN. Adam, let's get to the transactions of the week. Obviously, the one that I was shocked when it happened, when I woke up to this. Ryan Kerrigan. I mean, Ryan Kerrigan of all people. I mean, this is a fascinating move. I mean, it's obviously a good move because obviously you take somebody away from someone else in your division, but man, talk about going from 0 to 100 here. Yeah,
this is it's funny. Kerrigan was talking about that with John Clark from CSN Philly, or whatever they're called, NBC Sports Philadelphia. In his interview with John, he talked about how they kept it quiet. No, the Eagles more or less broke. Kerrigan put it on his Instagram. It's funny. He hasn't posted on Twitter in a long time, but he put it on IG. And this is look. He's on a 1-year deal. It's a low end deal. I know, knowing the Eagles and the way they think, kind of like with Chris Long, if he plays well this season in his role, as a pass rusher, that's really the way they're going to use him as a pass rusher, whether he's standing up with his hand in the dirt. That's what they brought him in to do, rush the passer. When he plays linebacker, he stands up. They're not going to ask him to cover very much. He's a pass rusher. He's 32 years old, and this guy's a really good football player. The Eagles know him unfortunately too well. And I like in the Eagles press release, you can tell Howie Roseman, the GM who signed him, he's pretty happy to have this guy not be with Washington. I think the Eagles would tell you that they're happy to get him out of there.
Yeah, he has the tie for the most sacks versus any team is against the Eagles, 13.5 sacks, them and the Cowboys. By the way, 13 against the Giants too, not bad either. So Now, considering, though, Adam, he came from a team that played him in a lot of different ways. His hand was in the dirt. Yeah. He stood up.
Yep.
They used him in a variety of ways. So is that kind of the expectation here that the Eagles say, hey, this guy is kind of a jack of all trades here?
Yes. And in fact, Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator, he didn't really go. He was only asked about Kerrigan once in his 28-minute media briefing, which I heard earlier. And he said he likes his versatility. Well, you just nailed it on the versatility. That's exactly what he was. As a matter of fact, Kerrigan will line up more as a linebacker technically in his career than defensive end, but think of him as a pass rusher. So when we see him this fall, or when the media gets to see him in training camp, you're going to see him standing up. You're going to see him play with a hand on the ground. He'll rotate at defensive end for sure, because they're going to need him there as a fourth end. But there'll be ways to use him. They may line him up as a left defensive end or right defensive end. Obviously, stand-up linebacker. And even when he plays on the strong side, think of him as a pass rusher. Don't think of him as a linebacker. Technically, he will be, but he's going to be a pass rusher. And this is a big signing for them, a little bit bigger than I anticipated. He definitely, by the way, before we move on to the next player, he has plenty left in the tank. The problem is last season, they made a decision. They were going to go with the 2 first-round picks. That's just going to happen. That's why it's not his fault. In consecutive drafts, they drafted DNs. That's the way it is.
Yeah, you mentioned Gannon. I wrote down some of the key words he used for the things he looks for his players: mean, motor, smart. And I feel like Kerrigan kind of like checks all 3 of those boxes for Gannon's what he wants from his players.
Yeah, and he's a better athlete than he's been given credit for. High motor guy, high character, would be great for the locker room. In a team that's clearly in transition, as the owner, Jeffrey Lurie, said, this is the kind of guy you want. Like Chris Long, when the Eagles signed him, they had no idea they would be as good as they would turn out to be. Particularly in 2017, they just didn't. They were just looking for veteran leadership. And the thing about that roster, if you look at all of the smart veterans that they brought in, LeGarrette Blount had changed his career around, who had issues off the field for many years, and he got himself together. Josh, and you just look at him coming in there, Torrey Smith, guys like that. Just the veterans would come in. Rodney McLeod came in at 16. Vinny Curry coming back. All these guys would come in and fortify their locker room, and a guy like Ryan Kerrigan will do the same thing.
Adam Caplan, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast at Caplan NFL on Twitter. Adam, staying on the defensive side of the ball, Josiah Scott is the newest cornerback here in Philadelphia. What is the latest on him, and why did they bring him in?
Yeah, so what the Eagles were looking for, Josh, is they were looking for players that they had fairly decent grades on. When I say grades, each draft pick, each player that's graded for the draft is going to have anywhere from 4 grades to 10 grades turned in by the area scout, the scouting director, assistant scouting director, general manager, personnel director, over-the-top scout, national scout, whoever it is. So they had good grades on him. And as we understand it, they're going to start him out at outside corner. He could definitely play inside because he did play both in college at Michigan State. And this is a guy that this is what you do. You general managers at this time of year, after the draft, look at guys who are buried on depth charts. Josiah Scott was not going to make the Jaguars. At best, he would have been their 5th corner. He's not long. The general manager, Trent Baalke of the Jaguars, came from the Niners. They like longer corners. Scott's arms are less than 30 inches. That is short for a corner. You like to have 31 at corner, as I understand it. So, okay. But he makes it up for smarts, toughness, and athleticism. And we'll see. He needs to make the roster. He's not be given anything. We'll see how it works out. But he's another in the mix guy for a backup job.
A couple of the moves this week, Adam, that have significance, maybe not in terms of their name, but in terms of where they come from. LaRaven Clark, the offensive lineman, Nate Meters, the defensive back. More of these ties to the Colts, to the Vikings, Sirianni, Gannon, getting guys that have familiarity with who they are and what they want to do.
Yeah, so Josh, let's start with LaRaven Clark, a former 3rd rounder of the Colts in 16. He's got exactly what they want in a swing tackle. Plus, he's played guard. Now, he's a little bit too long to play guard, but he's done it. He is 6'5", over 6'5", long arms, over 36-inch arms, which is extremely long for a tackle. Generally, you're looking for 33 or 30. You like to have 34 if you can get it, and he's got over that. But he doesn't always play to the kind of strength that you want. He's not if he could get over that Achilles injury, he had Achilles surgery, he had torn Achilles in first week of December. If he could get back by August and show that he could actually play this season, he'll be the top backup tackle and guard, top backup left tackle and right tackle. I don't know about guard, but left tackle and right tackle. That's what their hope is, but they're not going to know until they get there. It's when you come back from a torn Achilles, it's not the death knell that used to be 20 years ago, but it does take some time to come back. You could come back within 7 months. That doesn't mean he's going to be right physically. You just got to see how he is, and the hope is he gets on grass there in training camp or by the end of it and see what happens.
So now we have a total of Marcus Epps, Anthony Harris, Eric Wilson, Nate Meters, Craig James from the Vikings, Hassan Ridgeway with the Colts, Shaquille Taylor, LaRaven Clark. It seems more and more that listen, you guys talk about it on the podcast. This is what coaches do. They go to the front office and they say, hey, I need people who know my system to come in and help with the other guys.
Look, Jim Schwartz did it with Nigel Bradham, okay? He did it with 4 or 5 players when he first got there in Philly in 2016, and there's nothing wrong with it. Because even if they're low-end players like Meters and Shaquille Taylor, they know this coach. They know this coach. And Ridgeway had been here before Gannon got here. They were together for one season with the Colts in 2018. So we'll see how it works out. But the good thing is they could, you want to call them teachers, but they could explain things to the defensive players as they're going through it because they know the scheme. Though the question is, we're pretty certain it's going to be the Viking scheme. That's what we were told. And Gannon didn't dismiss that today. But we don't know how much of Zimmer's scheme is going to bring in. Is it going to be Mike Zimmer's scheme from Minnesota? It's going to be 100%. It's going to be 75%. We don't know that. Because what happens, Josh, is when you become a coordinator for the first time, you take blends of systems, but you have one dominant system. But then, like Doug Peterson, he brought in Andy Reid's system, but he brought in a different version of it. The kind of offense that they're going to bring in is what we're told is an old school West Coast. It's not going to be like Doug Peterson's West Coast. It's going to be more timing based and short area and run after the catch. Old Bill Walsh and Mike and Kyle Shanahan type offense.
Sounds very interesting to me. Adam Caplan, Inside the Birds podcast at Caplan NFL on Twitter. The latest edition of the podcast dropped this morning. Hit that subscribe button. You get the pods every Monday and Thursday with Adam and Jeff. And then Wednesdays, it's Q&A, Jason Avant, Quentin Michael. Of course, you got all the Greg Cosell stuff still on there from the draft as well. And as all guests, he appears every Thursday of Football at 4 on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Adam, great stuff today.
Thank you, Josh.